In the latest Union update, there were a number of things that were revealed to us. Now, I was going to make a video about Brain and his Keyblade, but I don't think there's much to really say about that hasn't already been said. But something that did actually catch my interest that I'd still like to speak about is when Darkness referred to Ventus as the fated child, and what this might actually mean in relation to the Master of Masters, the Book of Prophecies, and even Sora. So we are told by Darkness that Ventus is the fated child, and this reveal is supposed to enlighten us to the fact that Darkness didn't possess Ventus randomly, but rather that he was specifically chosen for the role of being possessed by Darkness. We're also told that Darkness killed Strelexia because Ventus wanted that. So does that mean that deep down Ventus is this psychopathic murderer, or is Ventus evil? Well, no, I highly doubt it. What's more likely the case is that Darkness simply misinterpreted what Ventus wanted. Remember, in the very same update, there was a scene with the Master of Masters telling Luciu that Darkness doesn't always understand what humans want and what they mean. It can misunderstand things. And I don't think that scene would have been paired up with the scene with Darkness if we wasn't meant to see how they're connected. So Darkness most likely just misinterpreted what Ventus wanted. I mean, sure, Ventus obviously wanted to have friends, he felt lonely, he obviously probably did want some amount of power, maybe not a malicious sense of power, maybe not tyrannical power, but he most likely wanted the power to just change his circumstances, the power to determine his own fate maybe, and being a union leader may have been the answers to his desire. But when Darkness became a part of him, Darkness misunderstood that, and it believed that in order to grant him the power that he desired, it would have to remove an obstacle, and that obstacle just happened to be Strelexia. Darkness didn't have a personal issue with Strelexia, and neither did Ventus. Neither of them had any real relation to her, so I guess you could say it was basically just business. Which is why, of course, Darkness said that Strelexia basically died for no real reason. But even that's not entirely true. We can safely assume that if Darkness hadn't joined with Ventus, Strelexia would probably still be alive and fulfilling her role as the Union leader, which supposedly was what she was meant to do according to the Book of Prophecies, right? But we know now that can't entirely be correct. Darkness says that Ventus is the fated child that is meant to harbour Darkness, and he says that this is fixed because it was written in the Book of Prophecies. So we know the Master of Masters is the one who wrote the Book of Prophecies. So that means that the Master of Masters must have known that Darkness would have to join with Ventus, which means that Ventus was part of the future he wanted to see happen. As I mentioned in my previous video, the Master of Masters wants to ensure the Book of Prophecies does come to pass, hence why he is very adamant to Ira that they can't change the future and stop the Keyblade War from taking place. The Master of Masters wanted to make sure everything the book says would happen would actually happen, and if that's the case, then Ventus harbouring Darkness is part of the Master of Masters plan, which means Strelexia's death maybe was also part of the Master's plan too. I mean, consider this. The only reason Darkness even chose Ventus is because it had been written into the Book of Prophecies. But here's what's interesting about that. The Master of Masters wants to ensure that the Book of Prophecies happens, right? And we know that Darkness has to harbour inside of Ventus, right? Well, that makes sense because the ending of the Book of Prophecy states that Darkness will prevail and the light expire, and we know that that passage is referring to Kingdom Hearts 3's final battle, and we know that that battle couldn't have taken place if Ventus wasn't there as one of the 7 Guardians of Light, and if Ventus wasn't there as one of the 13 Darknesses, which means that everything had to happen pretty much exactly as it did. So Ventus being separated from Ventus in Birth by Sleep, for example, that needed to happen because without that, they wouldn't have been able to get him from the past to participate in the final battle. And again, the Master of Masters wanted that battle in Kingdom Hearts 3 to happen because he wanted everything written in the Book of Prophecies to occur, including the final passage about Darkness prevailing and the light expiring. But for the Master of Masters plan to work, it relies upon Darkness knowing what's written in the Book of Prophecies. So I said in my previous video that the Master of Masters relationship to the Darkness is likely linked to the war between the Light and Darkness that began when the Master of Masters was still a boy. And we know that the Master of Masters has said before that he wants to defeat the Darkness, so I doubt they're friends. So the way the Darkness probably saw the Book of Prophecies being written was simply by being invisible. Remember, Darkness can go invisible and people won't know it's there. But the Master of Masters probably did know that darkness was watching him as he wrote the Book of Prophecies, and so he probably deliberately wrote the book in a way that would result in darkness playing into his plan. Darkness is basically, from what we've seen, an entity that works on instinct. It doesn't seem to have any real goal or purpose in and of itself, but when it becomes part of someone else, it attains a goal, it attains a purpose, and so then it strives to grant that person's goal however it can, even if it's in a deadly or destructive manner, like what happened with Ventus. So really, darkness harboring inside of Ventus and consequently killing Strelitzia, that only happened because the Master of Masters wrote the Book of Prophecies in the way he did, because he said that Ventus was the fated child to harbor the darkness. But there's more to consider about this, such as how this connects with Sora. If the Master of Masters wanted all of these events to happen, then that means Sora must have been a part of his plan in some way. Now, I don't think Sora is the fated child, because it seems darkness is saying that Ventus specifically is the fated child to specifically harbor darkness. I mean, look at Birth by Sleep. Ventus's entire character arc is pretty much built around his struggle with darkness and him accepting his own darkness and merging with darkness to forge the Keyblade. And we already know that Sora didn't end up harboring the darkness. I mean, he almost could have in Dream Drop Distance, but that was prevented. So Sora never ended up actually harboring the darkness, and yet the Book of Prophecies still came to pass like it was meant to. However, Sora is still key to Ventus's role as the fated child, because if Sora didn't exist, if Sora wasn't part of the Master's plan, then Ventus wouldn't have been able to rest inside of Sora's heart in Birth by Sleep. And if Ventus couldn't rest inside of Sora's heart, then Ventus wouldn't have been able to live to be in the final battle. And you know, really thinking about it, Ventus is pretty much essential, almost crucial to the entire story of Kingdom Hearts even happening. The entire story of Birth by Sleep only happened because of Ventus if you think about it. We know that Ventus is in Union, right? But if Ventus didn't end up in the future, then he wouldn't be in Birth by Sleep. And if Ventus wasn't in Birth by Sleep, then Xehanort wouldn't have been trying to use him to forge the Keyblade. And that is basically the reason for the entire story of Birth by Sleep. And Birth by Sleep is the reason for all of the other Kingdom Hearts games that are set after that. So if Birth by Sleep didn't happen, none of the other events of Kingdom Hearts happen. But Birth by Sleep only happens because of Ventus. I mean, it's literally only because of him why Master Xehanort is trying to basically create all this division to forge the Keyblade. If Ventus had just died back in the Union time, none of that would have happened. Even after all the events of Birth by Sleep, Ventus still could have died if Sora didn't exist. So both Sora and Ventus were essential to everything in the Book of Prophecies happening, which means that the Master of Masters must have had them both planned in some shape or form in order for these events to actually come to pass. So I'm guessing that means that by the end of Union, Darkness is going to join with Ventus again and be transported into the future with him. Now, since Kingdom Hearts 3 is finished and that Keyblade War is over and Darkness did prevail the Light Expire and Sora went and tried to fix everything by using the power of waking, I guess the question we have now is whether or not Darkness is still around, or did it perish in that battle? Well, I'm not sure if I have a clear answer for you, but I'm going to leave you with a scene that was in Remind, a very vague scene that I think may possibly give you your answer.
Ven! What? Who are you? Darkness? Vanitas?
As I say, the scene's quite vague. Now, this may mean absolutely nothing, but what I think's interesting is how this darkness that seemed to be speaking to Sora, it took the form of the Dark Inferno. Now, again, it could mean nothing, but bear in mind that the initial secret boss battle that we had in Kingdom Hearts 3 was the Dark Inferno, and it just seemed like it was just another enemy, right? But remember, secret boss battles usually tend to have some connection to the next game. Not always, it wasn't the case with Dream Drop Distance clearly, but traditionally they do. So, well, maybe there's something there to consider. Maybe the Dark Inferno is what darkness looks like. I mean, the Master of Monsters did say that darkness could look like monsters, and it kind of does look like a monster, and I don't know. Maybe there's nothing there. Something to keep in mind though. In that scene when Sora dives into Ventus's heart, when he's diving into each of the Guardians' hearts, they are experiencing a feeling that is in that moment. Now what's interesting is that Ventus by that point is already separated from Ventus. So at the time when Sora dives into Ventus's heart, darkness is still apparently there. So I guess it may be very possible that even though Ventus may be gone, the darkness inside of Ventus isn't. We know that at some point in one of the next Kingdom Hearts games, Ventus is going to have to get his memories back. The story of Union is going to have to tie into the present day somehow. And so what's going on with darkness, that's going to have to tie into one of the future Kingdom Hearts games. And Remind has kind of already set that up a little bit by implying that darkness is still present inside of Ventus, even though Ventus was separate from him at the time. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there, guys. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe that darkness is still part of Ventus? Do you believe that Ventus is indeed the fated child, or could it be someone else such as Sora? I don't think it is Sora because of the reasons I said. I mean, basically Ventus is the one that had to have darkness inside of him. Sora didn't have darkness inside of him, and the Keyblade Wars still happened. Whereas if Ventus didn't have darkness inside of him, then literally none of the events could have taken place. He couldn't have become a Union leader by killing Strelexia. He wouldn't have then been transported into the future. He wouldn't then be in Birth by Sleep. If he's not in Birth by Sleep, then the events of Birth by Sleep don't happen. Aqua doesn't end up in the realm of darkness. Terra doesn't become Terranaut. And so then the events of Kingdom Hearts don't happen. And you don't have 7 lights and 13 darknesses. So darkness being inside of Ventus pretty much was essential to the whole story. But you guys let me know what you think. Be sure to leave a like. And of course, remember guys, I am still a small channel, so I appreciate any support you guys give me through your likes and your comments. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you're notified when I drop more videos similar to this one. My name is NextGenNovelist, and that's all I've got to say, and I'm out. Peace.